Alrighty, our next presenter is coming from CrowdStrike. It's Mr. K. Singh. His presentation is going to be on digital forensics and incident response, and this is one I was really looking forward to, so I will give it to our presenter.
Hopefully this is on. Yeah, okay. Yeah, I might. I'm just trying to figure out where I'm going to stand for this. So hopefully everyone can see the screen pretty well. And it's got captions on the screen, so that's cool. Okay, so as you guys can see, this is DFIR, the Misrepresented Marathon. I'm Kay, and I'll apologize firsthand if this gets either too soft or too loud. Karaoke nights, too much paranoia now. All right, so real fast, why should you be listening to me? What kind of experience do I have? I'll start off with the actual job experience. In 2018, I was at Kaiser doing e-discovery and forensics. Shortly after, I went to Cylance. I did incident response there, and I also was the forensics lab manager. So I handled all the infrastructure for the global team and rebuilt new forensic facilities for them. Around 2019, I also started to work in WRCCDC. For those of you who don't know, CCDC stands for the Collegiate Cyber Defense Competition, WR Western Region. So I run the environments and I set up the environments that students compete in, and also make sure Red Team has boxes so they can fill students' lives with tons of joy and happiness. And just recently I went over to CrowdStrike as an incident response consultant. So still doing incident response day in, day out. On the side, the one advice I give to students is be careful with your money. I am not. I do a lot of stuff with cars, audio, a whole host of other hobbies that basically change every week. But enough of that. What is DFIR? Well, it stands for Digital Forensics and Incident Response. And how many of you have taken a class in digital forensics? Now, how many of you have taken a class in incident response? Okay, we've got one guy. That's great. So as far as classes go, you know, digital forensics and incident response are extremely closely linked together. The general description of the job is, you know, digital forensics is what you might see on like CSI or NCIS, where they're examining someone's hard drive. Obviously, they aren't really the most accurate in terminology, but that's where a lot of people know digital forensics from. Incident response, on the other hand, responding to an incident, so you're responding to the fires that sometimes companies or your own company put in. Go to the next slide real fast. Cool. So digital forensics and incident response are similar, but they're not the same. Well, basically, it's all interrelated. We start out with dead disk forensics or basic digital forensics. This is what most schools teach. It's pretty rare, at least right now, to have an undergrad program or even a master's program that does incident response classes, which I'll get to later. But this is what you see in classes, on TV, you know, the media, whatever. It's focused on, I'm hesitant to call it old school since it's still extremely relevant, but, you know, quote unquote old school. This is where you pick apart the ones and zeros quite literally. Bridge after that to get to incident response is reporting. And a lot of students or, you know, even people who work in digital forensics or e-discovery, this is what you write about. So you don't really think about reporting when you think about cybersecurity job, right? You think if you're working in a SOC type role, you're going to be looking at events all day. Yes, that's true. If you're doing incident response, you're going to be fighting fires for other companies or within your own company. That's true. But there's no point in doing the job without being able to tell people what happened. So this, and I'm going to have a long slide about this later, but reporting is another step as you move to incident response. The next one, which is a little sort of unexpected by most, I'd like to say, is threat hunting. Threat hunting is essentially exactly what it says on the tin. You're hunting for threats within the environment. But when we talk about, you know, digital forensics and incident response, we don't really talk about threat hunting, because when we do incident response, most people say you already know where the bad guy's been, but that's not the case. It rarely is where you know exactly where they've been, what they've done. So threat hunting is the second to last bridge where you go full on incident response, which is what this talk is about. So everything in this pyramid builds up to incident response. If you can't do one of the three, it's not fully incident response, right? So incident response, some people call it digital forensics light because you don't do as much disk-based forensics. You don't look into every single nitty-gritty detail that like a quote unquote classical investigator may. It's based on more skim data. You work off of small bits of data. So, yep. Why do we do this? Incident response, not only consultants, but those who work inside of another firm are basically firefighters. Company gets breached, right? This is the emergency team you call. Not exactly the equivalent to 911 or other emergency services, but it's pretty close. And a lot of people think, okay, you're working in incident response cases, you must deal with, nation state actors or, serious hacker groups. I guess anonymous is apparently still relevant. I just had a client say that they were attacked by anonymous, which not true, but whatever. Not every case we get is Russia or China, Iran, or whatever nation state actor. They vary so much. So one of the other things that we don't really talk about in school or in general per se is that every case is different, yes, but every case also has a different scale, right? Some cases are going to be months spent, yes, months, on getting everything thoroughly done. In some cases, they're just going to be a week because all it really is someone set up an automated program to scan for a hole. And sometimes they'll find that hole and it'll take 3, 4, 6 months for it to actually be hacked. And even then, right, it's not a big thing. So breaches can happen by both 16-year-olds, as seen with the Uber and Rockstar breach, and they can happen by very advanced nation state groups like, Russia and China are the classic too. A lot of people also think that just, where a lot of people are focused on going into the cloud, right? Oh, we're going to move into the cloud. It's more secure. It's easier to manage. Some people say, oh, we're going to be hybrid. We're going to have some of our stuff in the cloud, some on-prem. Nothing is really quote unquote safe. Just because you have something on premise in an actual data center that you own versus in someone else's data center, which is what the cloud really is, you can't really be safe. You do one way or the other, right? There's still a attack surface. There's still a way for someone to get in because you're still accessing resources, right? If someone says, oh, we're going to put our email servers in the cloud, that's great. You still have an email server. You still have Office 365. You still have Exchange, whatever you use. Incident response doesn't deal primarily in classic, like, oh, they hacked all the servers. No, people can, I don't know if it's this mic or just the speakers. People can, hopefully this one is on. I'll switch. Is this one that's crackly? It's on, right? Okay, perfect. Cool. So we don't primarily deal with, oh, they got hacked into all the servers and they took all the data, right? People still get in via email, what we call business email compromise or business email instant response cases where phishing email got sent. Now they have access to that person's inbox and they can, act as a man in the middle and exfiltrate data back. Just as a quick story, we had one case where the threat actor got into the email and they pretended to be the CFO and they made fake payout orders like, we're buying another company, right? Can you send 150,000 to this bank account that was not legitimate at all? So incident response, it's not all just servers and stuff like Windows and Linux like a lot of people think about, but it's a big variety, right? We'll even get into like the classical IBM mainframes, and we've had some drone cases where we need to recover drone footage and all that cool stuff. Even automotive forensics is becoming a very big thing now. Like with BMW, if you have a BMW, it has your entire phone basically imaged onto it, right? So not only just your contacts and your messages and your call logs, but where you've been, and it'll like know who's even been in the car with you because that's how BMW works. And I'm not monitoring the Zoom chat, but if anyone wants to put in questions, hopefully I'll get to them at the end of the thing. So incident response is really, it's a marathon, right? A lot of people focus only on the analysis portion. You know, you're hunting for the threat, you're finding where the bad guy went and did, but there's so much more to the process that not a lot of people think about. And, you know, a lot of people say, oh, we're here just to, you know, incident response. All you do is make sure the threat actor is gone. There's a lot more to it. You have to tell a story. You have to tell, you know, not just the client, not just legal counsel, but even shareholders and board of directors, right? What actually happened in the incident. So when you add up all the steps together, it really does become a long haul. You know, 50% of it, what the client pays for is your analysis, and 50% is what you actually write in the report and how good it is. Because if the client doesn't know that some of their stuff was popped or breached, or, you know, threat actor got into it and took data off, it's not in the report. Did it really happen? No, not now until they find out later when it's on the sale for the dark web for pennies. So consultant not only has to be super, super technical, they have to have really good soft skills as well. So again, you have to uncover the narrative. I'm going to switch to standing at that mic and hopefully it won't crackle as much. But yeah, you need to uncover the narrative. You need to know, you know, who the threat actor is. That's something that CrowdStrike is famous for. We do, you know, these really cool graphics. I believe this one's Russia, but I'm not entirely sure. But that's like sort of our thing is we do the attribution of which group or which country perpetrated the breach, what they did. Were they here for financial data? Were they here for PII? If it's a healthcare company, PHI. Do they want, you know, trade secrets? We've worked with Fortune 100 and 200 manufacturing firms that have some really cool stuff that a lot of people want. Where in the environment, when. So when is great, because just because you're an incident response, the breach doesn't have to have happened just now. It could have happened months ago, and they've been, you know, sort of sneaking around the environment, trying to see, they've been moving laterally and figuring out what they actually want to take. So the breach could have happened 3 months ago. And the only way the client knows is that they see, you know, tons of data being lifted up through the firewalls and say, oh, why is someone moving, you know, 5 terabytes of data? That shouldn't be happening. We've been breached. And we come into them, oh yeah, it happened 3 months ago. You didn't patch a server. And again, I already covered the why. Why are they there? A lot of companies and a lot of people, again, they think, and I mentioned this already, where incident response is not a quick fix, right? Company's been breached. It takes time to not only figure out how they got breached, but how to fix it. So if it's something simple, sometimes we'll get a simple case where if anyone knows what Exchange is, it's Microsoft's email servers that you host on your own data center, right? If it's an Exchange thing where the threat actor got in via Exchange, that's an easy fix. You just patch it. If it's something more malicious, like a nation state who is loading a malware using the antivirus system that they use, which we've seen, that's not a quick fix. That takes time. That may even involve switching out your entire security stack because everything's compromised and the vendor doesn't have a fix. We see this a lot with like a lot of legacy solutions. And just because they got a ransom doesn't mean they're not still waiting, right? We see, especially nation states mainly, they will leave backdoors because they want to get back in. You don't see it as much with companies, or not companies, but groups that go for ransom, like ransomware, like Conti and Lockbit. They just want the initial ransom. They don't really come back. It's rare that they come back. Nation states, they want in all the time. And again, just because you think they've gone, just because they've gotten some of the data, like a decent amount, they'll still come back for more. So there's so many different ways they can do this in terms of getting back in. So that's more of like the malware reverse engineering side of the house, where they will see what the threat actor actually did in. Like if we talk about the SolarWinds breach that was on the news earlier this year or last year, it's sort of a blur at this point, right? But that's a pretty big backdoor. They're in the supply chain. How do you get them out? And the answer to SolarWinds, I believe, was rebuild the entire product from scratch, because they were on so early in on the build, like how they build the product, they had to redo everything. Then that goes down to the companies that buy it. Then it takes months to take it, exchange the product out. And so the entire time you're vulnerable. I believe it was Mandiant that sort of uncovered it. And it took months. And we will still occasionally see vulnerable SolarWinds because when you're going through change control, change management, there's a process to get these things done. Time bombs are somewhat rare, but there's that. And there's also tribal knowledge, which is something that a lot of system administrators hate, stuff that's not documented. Oh, Joe here, who worked 2 years ago, he actually opened a port so he could work from home. And no one ever patched it because no one knew about it. They just assumed it was a business thing. It wasn't. It was not against company policy. That's how the threat actor got in. It's all stuff like that. And from the consulting side, when we're there, we have to make sure that we've uncovered, we've turned every stone over. There's nothing left behind because somewhat obviously, right? If the consulting firm comes in and says everything is okay, 2 weeks later, oh, they got in with the same vector that you said was okay and patched up, right? It's not the best look. So you have to practice a lot of good due diligence there. So this is what I like to refer to as a pretty IR cycle. I believe this is slightly different from what a lot of people have listed as the IR cycle, just because, I mean, this is how I personally see it, and it's pretty close to what you'll see like from ISACA and other companies. But essentially, when we do incident response engagement, right, company reaches out, hey, we got hacked. We'll get on a scoping call with them. Scoping call is basically saying, okay, what happened? What sort of resources do you have? What are we dealing with here, right? So you're scoping out if you guys can even handle the engagement. I don't think we've personally turned away any engagements recently, but sometimes some companies will have to turn away engagements either because they don't have the tooling or it's just too big. Or maybe you have to work with another company, so you bring in a second company. Like I don't know that I can talk about that actually, but sometimes you have to multiple IR firms working the case, and this is where that comes in. The next part is detection and deployment. So from the scoping call, you gather information, right? The threat actor was in our storage array that houses everyone's data. Okay, so we're going to start there. So that's where we start. Deployment is when we deploy triage tooling. This is the stuff that gathers the information and sends it back to us so we can look at it, because we're not going to go to every box individually. We look at everything through a really big massive screen that I'll show later. Analysis, looking at the data, trying to see where things have gone. Where did the threat actor go and what else has happened? That goes straight into containment and eradication, which is, if the threat actor is still in the system, make sure they don't go anywhere else and then get them out. It can be, completely pulling the plug on boxes, which we don't like to do since that'll disturb evidence, but sometimes you just have to pull the plug. Sometimes you can turn the network card off on the server so it doesn't communicate. There's tons of different ways. And then we go into reporting and lessons learned. But one of the key things about this cycle is that detection, deployment, analysis, containment, eradication, it's all one stage, right? But because of the way a case works, you will be flowing through all these steps, not so much on reporting and lessons learned, but all the steps, getting on calls, giving client status updates, that sort of stuff. It's one step that just flows back and forth. But the last one is reporting and lessons learned. Obviously, I mentioned the report earlier, but the lessons learned is also critical, right? Because if the client doesn't have anything to go, they just have, okay, they did this, how do we fix it, right? Client should know how to fix things and make sure they don't get breached, at least from that area. But this is all, a very pretty cycle. This is what you see in textbooks. I'd like to imagine this is more of the reality. Lots of Zoom calls. The joke I like to make is that you're on a call with a client a lot of the time because they're panicked. We'll have cases come in where they straight up say, we want someone on the phone with us 24/7. That's a lot of money and a lot of people hours to sit on the call and handle people's questions from the client side. And I'm going to harp on this quite a lot through the slide, but incident response, while it is an extremely technical job, you have to have people skills. You have to have people skills doing this. Cool. So I'm going to just somewhat quickly go over the entire IR process more in depth. Too much of this slide. Cool, scoping call. So Like I said, the scoping call determines what you're up against, what did they do, so on and so forth. But the next thing is tasking, or got a task thing. So first we've got to have workflows going on both the CrowdStrike side and the client side, right? We are going to obviously want data in to look at because we can't do work without having data in. Client needs to go and gather it. Maybe they need to contain systems. Maybe they need to image systems, like take a forensics image of the systems. Maybe they need to ship systems to us. So every side is working. The client does not sit idly. They have to get workflows done too. If they refuse to work with us, which has happened before, there's a grumpy sysadmin that has some other secrets, or sometimes the client just doesn't have enough resources to handle all the tasking. It'll either slow or completely obliterate the incident response effort. So, having everyone doing something is extremely key. But one of the most important things is setting expectations. We don't work magic as much as we wish we could. It will take time to get through the data, which is a lot of the problem that clients and legal counsel or the lawyers, on the client side will have. The most common question we get every single day without fail is, was there data exfiltration? Did they take PII, PHI, whatever? And the answer is going to be, we don't know quite a lot of it because we haven't looked at the data. One of my old bosses used to tell clients all the time, this is not a sprint, this is a marathon. It is going to take time to get all the answers. We may not even get all the answers, right? Because I'll talk about this later. Some threat actors will obliterate evidence to the point where no one can get it. So, all right. So data collection and ingestion. As much as we wish data would get to us magically, it doesn't. Tooling needs to be deployed, and we need to have visibility. So we deploy at CrowdStrike Falcon Forensics Collector. Other companies will have different tools such as Siler and Cape and their own internal tooling. But basically what this does is instead of taking a full disk image like a lot of classic, quote unquote, classic forensics does, it takes just skim amounts of data, relatively speaking, right? You collect some logs, you collect a couple other different artifacts that happen or that occur on systems, and it gets beamed back up to us. Then it gets fed through our analysis pipeline. And sometimes it's not automatic, right? For Windows systems and more common systems, it's automatic because everyone uses Windows or everyone uses Mac OS or Linux. But if you're wondering something weird like a Windows 2003 server that's never been updated, and we're just like, okay, this is going to require some massaging because things have changed quite a lot in that time. If you're running a mainframe, it's going to be completely different. If we're doing something like phones, that's not automated. Phone analysis, you have to have the phone in front of you. You have to be sitting like physically at a system. That's different. So that'll be happening. And then we go to agent deployment. So agent deployment is something that varies from shop to shop. We deploy our own tooling because it's amazing, to be honest. But the great thing with agent tooling is just because you've collected the data at one point, if you need it again, run it from the agent. If you have something that pops up during the investigation on a system, agent will alert you and we'll get an email or a Slack message from one of our other people working the case saying, hey, this tenant had an alert for someone running PS exec. You should check it out because that might be important. Or, LSAS dump, someone dumped passwords off the system, stuff like that. But this is a cycle because as the engagement rolls on, you might find other things you need to poke at. Hey, we need logs from the firewall, or hey, you have a site in Mexico that was also breached at the same time. We need information from there too. Please deploy to there. So this cycle continues on and on and on. It takes a lot of time. Some companies are really great about it. They have deployment systems set up, others not so much. Different companies, different maturity levels. All right, so this is actually 3 slides. I'll be going back and forth, but there's 3 main different ways we look at data. The first, as I just talked about, is the triage data. So like I mentioned, triage data doesn't collect, relatively speaking, that much compared to the other end of the spectrum, full disk forensics, right? So system event logs, shell bags, execution artifacts, user artifacts, network artifacts, that's sort of what our triage data takes in. And that's what I'd like to say 85 or 90% of the time we look at. We base everything off this triage data analysis. If we don't see it in triage, but we know that system is, been breached through one way or another, we will go to full disk. But most of the time we try to avoid full disk because it takes time. Triage data, you can get through a box in 20, 30 minutes if there's nothing on there. Full disk forensics, the processing time will take hours. Looking at it may take a lot of time. Even with all the automation that we have and other companies have, it still takes time to process, 1 gigabyte of data versus, say 256 gigabytes of data. Even if most of that 256 gigs is empty, there's nothing on there, the system will still go through and try to find anything that's been left behind. But this, like I keep on going back to triage data, is our bread and butter. We get our overarching strokes, and we can dive deep in triage data analysis. I'd like to say it hosts maybe 99% of the data that we need. We might have 1%, from some weird artifact that got covered up, but triage data has mostly everything. How do we look at triage data? Cool. So this is a photo of TimeSketch. TimeSketch is a free program that a lot of people use, both for recreational, like, capture the flag events and competitions, but also in the industry. I believe TimeSketch, I believe, is open source, if I'm not mistaken. I might be mixing it up with a Google tool right now. But this is just multiple systems. Yes, I see 2 systems here, the main controller and a desktop. Long story short is these are all the logs, but they're a lot nicer to read, at least in this form right here. I can't show it on the Zoom, I don't think, easily, so where I'm sort of pointing at, but date time, most of the time we work in Zulu time, UTC, everything's changed to Zulu time. And in this case, in the message area, we have what the artifact is. So in this case, this is a DLL with a hash that we might look up and find either internally through our own database or externally that, hey, that's not a legitimate DLL. Someone stuffed a virus in there, or remote access Trojan, what have you. You'll see other execution artifacts. If we're looking for a threat actor that is a ransomware group like Lockbit, we might get lucky and we might look at the shellbags artifact, which will let us know, hey, they navigated to a share. If we're looking for execution, like they executed PSExec or an NTDS dumping tool, so on and so forth, all these technical tools, we'll look at a shimcache, amcache, and shellbags to make sure that we know that they executed it. Because the lovely thing about forensics and incident response is that just because something says something happened doesn't mean it has. Shimcache, which is an execution artifact, tells you if something's been executed. It means different things on different versions of Windows and different updates of Windows. Sometimes it's not accurate, so we have to get multiple pointers. It can be so much as we see the file of whatever they wanted being created. It can be they navigated to a folder that says, whatever, like a dumping tool or John the Ripper, what have you. So yes, things are spelled out in the data, but while we don't like to, sometimes it's just speculation. As much as we hate that term, legal counsel hates that term so much. We don't use speculation if legal's on the call. Sometimes we start off on speculation and we have to make it into hard facts. But yeah, so this is just a view of what you might see if you're working in incident response. A lot of companies have their own custom tooling. We have ours based on Splunk. It looks somewhat similar in the regard that, there's a search and there's events. Beyond that, a little different. There's a couple other tools that some might use, but yeah. So this is where we spend a bulk of our time doing analysis in a view that looks like this. And the data is vastly much more pared down. And normally instead of 2 hosts, there's 50,000, which sucks. And next step, like I mentioned, live host-based analysis. So sometimes in the middle of an investigation, as I mentioned, you might have a analyst come on and say, hey, we saw someone dumping the ntds.dip file from a Windows domain controller, or we saw someone doing a pass a hash attack to get a golden ticket into the environment. For those of you who don't know, a golden ticket is quite literally exactly what it says. It's like a catch-all unlimited entry. You can basically get into wherever with a golden ticket as far as the Windows side. So we'll get that alert and we'll go into the system with our agent, and we'll be able to see, okay, we'll be there on the shell at the same time. And we've had interesting cases where we're on the system at the same time a threat actor is. And so, once in a while on very crazy engagements, you'll be like, why is someone typing stuff into this bash history? Oh, that's a threat actor. They're doing something right now. Or it could be a sysadmin, right? Someone who's collecting data from the client. Who knows? It's our job to find out. But live analysis isn't really talked about as much because a decent amount of it is automated to some point, right? If you have our agent on there, in our case, Falcon, right? It's antivirus, it's endpoint detection and response. The endpoint detection part will most of the time, 99% of the time, shut everything down, right? It'll detect someone's doing something, it'll shut it down, kick them out, lock the box down. There's always that 1%, 0.01%, whatever on any product period that is either a miss or the threat actor has bypassed it, which happens. It'd be foolish to say it doesn't. So live host-based analysis is what we do. Right here is I think I skipped it. Yeah, this is a screenshot of a Falcon and specifically our remote shell. So we can go into this, we can select the system and say, I want to log in, full command line access. We can get memory dumps, we can get all the network processes, who's on, we can navigate just like File Explorer to any directory. If we want to get a file off, like if we have a rclone configuration file that rclone is basically a tool that lets you copy data. Okay. If we want to grab the rclone config file to see what it was pointed at and what it was beaming up to, we can do that. A couple other things. We also have custom scripts that we run. This is just a generic screenshot that I took from the marketing team, but there's a patch installing script, which is not something we do on the IR side. We have a lot of other custom like goodies that we'll run. But this is what Falcon looks like. Every company uses something different. There's also, Google has a program called Velociraptor, which is similar in regards to having this live shell. But yeah. And last but not least, at least for this section, full disk forensics. This part takes a lot of time. Okay, this part takes a lot of time, both processing hour and man hours, even if it is a small device. Sometimes we will need to grab a full disk image if the threat actor decided to blitz the event logs and there's nothing left that Windows recognizes. Sometimes we can carve things out from that. It's quite literally called carving out data. We've also had to do full disk images to find rclone, like I mentioned, this tool for data exfiltration to see the configuration file, but also sometimes we'll find the files that the threat actor wanted. Sometimes they'll delete what we call the staging directory, which is where they put everything real fast before they upload it. And we'll be able to say, okay, we covered some of these compressed archives, these zip files, RAR files, whatever, and we're able to get this much information. Sometimes we can only get a listing of the files that were in there. Sometimes we can get files out. It depends on how much, if any, those archives were overwritten. Because fun fact, when we get into Windows and other systems, even when you delete something, sometimes it's always there, at least for a time. This lovely, ugly looking tool is called Xways. I chose this specifically because it's a more traditional looking tool, at least on the forensic side, right? Left side, you've got quote unquote File Explorer. You can view the MFT, and it's basically File Explorer and a little bit there. But the main thing that we always look at when we're doing full disk forensics is this bit right here, this lovely hodgepodge of hex. And sometimes you'll delete a file, say that, what are they on? AlexGSD-1. Sometimes that file will be deleted. It's marked as deleted as Windows, but it's not deleted from the disk. When you delete something, you do right click delete, move it to a recycle bin, whatever, it's still on the disk, just that Windows doesn't see it. So sometimes we can recover files that way, or partially recover files. And in this case, this file has a hidden email in it, which I assume is the point of this demonstration, because that's an image and it's very odd to see an email just straight up written there. So that's something that someone planted in theory. But yeah, so this is one of the tools that we use. It doesn't look this bad, I promise. This is a very old version. Well, it's not an old version so much that it's on like an old system or Windows server with no pretty GUI setup. This is from the website. Xways is notoriously old school. Another tool that we use is Magna Axiom, which is this, but it looks a lot prettier. I don't have a photo of it, unfortunately, I don't think. Nope. Okay. I don't have a photo of Magna Axiom, but that's the more automated side of the house. So Xways does processing, but a lot of it is still manual. Axiom is more automated than manual. I know a lot of the federal agencies like Axiom. We like Axiom too, a lot of consulting firms, because it is what I like to call the iOS of forensics. It's you just say, hey, I have an image here and I want to look for web browser activity. I want to look for Chrome Firefox activity. I want to look for Facebook Messenger activity, stuff like that. Axiom will also do, it'll do phones as well. I believe it also does drones and automobiles, but don't quote me on the last two. I'm not 100% sure. I'm just going off memory. So basically, the main goal of the game while you're doing analysis is to get the threat actor out, right? You don't want them in the network. So past slides, we're talking about analysis. Analysis is extremely key to containment and eradication. But this is a cycle, like I mentioned, you will go from they're sort of intermeshed. It's kind of hard to like separate them. And the fact that you might be doing analysis, you'll see activity now, lock that box down, then you go back to analysis and you might repeat this tango 5-10 times. You might, if it's a ransomware group, that you're not going to have so much containment and eradication. Because like I mentioned, ransomware groups only come for the data and then they're gone. They don't really care about anything else. Alongside the analysis, you need to track where the threat actor went. So when we're looking and we're sort of quote unquote drawing out a map, we will say, okay, the threat actor got in through this server and they used this user account to get, to here and so on and so forth. So you're tracking that lateral movement to see where they went. And we'll look for signs of persistence and backdoors. So maybe we'll leave a cron job on a Linux server that runs every so often and it beams back up like a bot. Stuff like that. So the main goal, one of the main goals, I should say, is to get the threat actor out. But they like to come back in sometimes. I don't remember the character's name from The Simpsons, but it's pretty accurate. Reporting. I hate reporting. I think all consultants do, honestly. It's the worst part of the job, but it is also the most needed. Everyone wants to hear what you write on that report. The way we typically do reports in standard is your executive summary, the actual technical meat, and the appendix items. So most of the time you'll see, upper levels, you only want to see the executive summary. What did they get? How liable are we? That sort of stuff. IT and SOC, CISO, and that sort of stuff will want the technical portion and the appendix portions. But most of the time we try to focus more on the executive summary, since some companies just don't care about the technical details. They just want to get it over with, right? They're doing this for compliance reasons, which is wrong. They should be doing the whole thing in terms of patching, but some don't care. It is what it is. And legal counsel is the main reason why reporting sucks. Well, if there's anyone from legal counsel watching this, I hope not. I love you guys, but legal counsel is there to make sure that the client doesn't get into too much hot water. If you're writing a report and you have legal counsel, they're going to want to review it over and over again. Some lawyers that we work with are very easy about it. They'll just give you a call and they say, hey, we need to change one line. Some want 2-hour-long review sessions. It just varies. And there's no making anything sound nice, right? We can't really write, they got this server, but they didn't get any other servers. So that's great. We just say, they got the server. This is what they took, if we're able to figure that out, right? There's no making anything look nice, unfortunately. And I mentioned this before about speculation, but we, not only consultants but the security people, we don't like speculation because it leaves room for guessing, right? We are called in as outside investigators to make sure that there is no speculation. We know exactly what happened. Sometimes you have to speculate. Like I mentioned before, you'll have breaches that happened 3 months before, and we only know this through some artifacts, but we may not be even able to find the original breach. We'll see malicious logins dating 3, 6, 8, 12 months back. But because of the way some companies do logs, you won't have all the information. We'll just say, oh, we see malicious activity happening way back when, but we don't have enough information to actually tell you, 100% what happened or how they got in. Sometimes we have to say that. Most of the time, we hope we get all the data that tells us definitively how they got in and what they did. Sometimes it's speculation. And the report is really what the client wants, because it'll have not only what happened, but the recommendations, how they rebuild. If it was an advanced nation state, like an insidious attack that took months to carry out, those recommendations are going to be interesting, because it's something like SolarWinds, or where you can't really patch it due to like a lot of different reasons or something of that nature. Yeah, those recommendations suck. If it's something easy like patch here, I keep on coming back to Exchange because it's popular right now, or Exchange, or you're still vulnerable to Log4j, just patch the application, get it over with, right? Easy recommendation. The report goes everywhere, right? You might have meetings with just, say, the C-level, the CISO, and some of the technical leads, but then that report gets distributed to the board of directors and shareholders. And so having a good report is really, really key. You can't have any missteps or anything in it. We have rounds and rounds of editing. Every company does. It'll get revised at least 10, 15 times and reviewed 10 or 15 times, because there can be no mistakes. The same thing with analysis. Analysis, I'm not going to say you're allowed to make a mistake. Everyone makes mistakes, though. With reporting, no mistakes. But the cycle doesn't really end. Incident response is just a cycle, and you have to have a lot of balance, right? At the beginning, I had that little circle diagram, the pretty IR process, and it is a process, right? You will jump from a Zoom call to analysis, doing analysis while on a Zoom call, to maybe containing something, so on and so forth, right? I have this joke here where like all you're doing is squeezing an analysis in between different casework Zoom calls, right? You might have, if you're extremely busy, you might have multiple calls a day and only 30 minutes in between to get analysis in, and then you're working, late hours. We try to avoid that, but sometimes it happens. So incident response is not only a balance of what you're doing for that case, but any other case working yourself, right? Because you can't burn out. But I mean, rinse and repeat, right? Companies get breached daily. Whether it's a quote unquote easy breach or something more insidious, right? Every case is different. Right, it's a spice of life, right? You might go from a business email case where it's just a phishing email to, oh, it's a nation state attack on a power plant. Okay, a little different, but that's incident response, right? It changes daily. And depending on which company you're at, maybe you're at something like Dragos, which specializes in like power plants, ICS SCADA environments. They take a lot of that work. Over here on our house, we don't deal with that as much, but sometimes you have that. We've done cases with just about every company under the sun, so it changes. It's a cycle. So I'm leaving. It was like 7 minutes, give or take, for Q&A if anyone has it. He's got the mic. Yeah.
I don't know. Hello?
Yeah, we're good now.
Yeah, sorry about that. So I kind of came in late. So you basically introduced this entire software called CrowdStrike?
So CrowdStrike is the name of the company I'm at.
Okay.
We have software that we use on engagements or casework, but we're also a consulting firm. So we do incident response, this talk, red teaming, ton of other activities. But yeah, we have antivirus, AV EDR, so endpoint detection response, which is the agent that I talked about. And then we also have our own SIM. So we have a stack of tooling. So it's both software and professional services type organization.
So you mentioned forensics. So do you guys actually uncover certain things in terms of certain issues that happen in terms of unethical cyber issues that happen?
Like stuff you might see on the news?
Yeah, on the news, or in terms of data, but I'm just curious.
So as far as like physical disengagements,
yeah,
and stuff, let's go with sure. I don't know, like, so yeah, we do that work, but I can't tell you what we've done. Right. So yeah, we'll do stuff that reaches the news quite often. Yeah, so I mean, every engagement is different. Some are instant response, some are dead disk forensics, where we're looking at someone's laptop or desktop or something. I'm trying to stay vague because, like I said, I can't talk about
Yeah, no,
specifically what we've done or what other companies have done.
So when the top companies get hacked, they call CrowdStrike. This is one of the premier companies. Any other questions? How did you get started in this? What made you want to go into be incident response? Sounds really cool.
I did a competition in high school called Cyber Patriot, which
Diane Miller.
yes, so that was her thing. She was one of the major supporters of Cyber Patriot. So I started that in high school, which is a blue teaming competition. Then I came to Cal Poly and I did CCDC as a blue teamer. So I was a student in that competition and kind of spiraled from there. It wasn't anything specifically I came to Cal Poly in mind for, like as far as the job field goes, but I knew it was going to be something in this area.
Any other questions for our guest? All right, can we give him a round of applause and thank you? Very interesting, very interesting.